Okay, good afternoon, members. Welcome to the meeting. Can we start with agenda item 1, apologies, attendance and apologies for absence, please. Dominic.
We've had apologies from Councillors Alan Fraser and Graham Smith and Mr Michael Conway.
Thank you. Can we say a special welcome this afternoon to two young people with us, Callum King and James Aurelius, who are here with the Authority on Work Experience. Welcome to you. Can we then move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask Delith Harris, our legal executive, to advise us, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've had a look at the agenda and I note there is a reference to schools in item 6 relating to the EAS, but it's very general, so there are no declarations for members need to declare at this meeting, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on then to agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting? You see there before you minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday the 19th of March. Would you like to go through them page by page, or are you happy to accept them en bloc? Move them. Thank you very much. And the next item, the minutes of the special meeting held on Wednesday the 30th of April. Are you happy to approve those? Are you happy to take them en bloc?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can we move on then to agenda item 4, the action sheet on page 20? You can see there the actions. I think they've all been completed. Any comments? Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on now then to agenda item 5, the summary of executive decisions for scrutiny and review, starting on page 21. And you can see there the items on page 24, decisions of the Cabinet between March 2014 and the 24th of June 2014. Page 24. Page 25. Page 26. And item 2 there, decisions of the leader and executive member for children and young people. Page 27. There we have the decisions of the Chief Officer for Children and Young People. Page 28. Sorry. Councillor Jeffries.
I'd like to know, with relation to the decision which ends in 12, which is the second one down on page 28, how many parents were surveyed and how many responded to the survey?
Okay. Can we have that information, please? Dominique, would you send that out to all members? Anything else there on page 28? Page 29. You can see there at item 6, decision of the executive member for children and young people. Carried on there to page 30.
I had a query on that, Chair.
Mr. Ron Mark.
Apologise, Ron Marchant. Sorry, I've forgotten. I have a query on the decision which is EDYP 2014-06 about the exemption from tendering provisions on the contract to give Capita One systems to the Capita Children's Services. I just wondered what the background was. I've not been able to get full details of the agreement. I know it was available, but I haven't been back in town long enough. I just wondered what the reasoning was. I know Capita have obviously developed the system, and therefore it seems sensible to give it to them. But I also know that sometimes that can be a risky proposition in that putting all those eggs in one supplier's basket can be a bit... can be risky, that's all I say. So I just wondered if there's any background to that.
Could we have some more information on that, please? Yeah. Report to all members. Thank you. Okay, are there any other items there on page 30? And page 31. Okay, members. We are expecting a report from Dave Congreve and the Executive Member, Councillor Dave Yowell, on the delivery of the PAP and the Recovery Board. And they did ask if we could bring the item forward. So, with your permission, if they're available. Okay, can we welcome Dave Congreve and the Executive Member for Young People Learning, Councillor David Yowell, to the meeting to give us a brief update on the PAP and the Recovery Board and the new Children's Board. Councillor Yowell?
Well, that's very kind, Steve. Can you all hear me? Good. Right. I'll assume that... well, I shouldn't assume anything, so I'll just get right into it. The Recovery Board, why we need it, I think it's known to everybody now that we're in special measures. I suppose it's a reflection of the relative state of our special measures by virtue of having a Recovery Board. We're not considered to be down the bottom end of special measures and warranting a more punitive intervention. We don't see it necessarily, the Recovery Board that is, as an intervention as such. We take them at their word that they're supportive and they're here to help. And I emphasise support and help. They're not here, and we don't see them as being here to dictate to us. Although there have been some robust exchanges in the couple of meetings that we've had already. Their remit is just that, to help, support, offer suggestions, use their experience of best practice, and encourage us to be more proactive in picking up on a few things that they have suggested. The makeup of the board is quite impressive. We have, and this is most of them, I think, a guy called Carl Naparella, who is the Welsh Assembly Government's input. A guy called Mel Ainscough, or Professor Mel Ainscough, and he's the guy who's pushed through the Westminster Government's London Challenge, which is their equivalent, or our equivalent, is the Schools Challenge in Cymru. So he's got a track record in that direction. Sue Davis, who is, I believe, a professor at Lampeter University, and she's quite an expert in education and recovery. Joyce Redfern, who some of you have met because she spoke to the full council about a fortnight ago. Joyce is, or was, the chief executive of Monmouthshire County Council, and then went on to be chief executive of Wigan County Council, which made her, I'm reliably informed, she told me herself, in fact, that it made her the most powerful and perhaps one of the most highly paid women in politics in the country. She's now working on her own account, self-employed, as a consultant, and I think, for one, and I don't know what you might have a view on it, having listened to it at the council meeting the other week, I, for one, think that she's good value for the money that they are paying her. She's excellent. She's one of these people that you have an instant liking for, because she's incredibly affable, incredibly engaging, very, very easy to talk to and get on with, but you always have that undercurrent of, the iron fist in a velvet glove. So if we weren't going in the right direction, she would bite your ankles. Then we have Ifian Evans, who is, I believe, the Chief of Education in Ceredigion, and he's got a pretty diamond-crusted or encrusted status there, because they've achieved excellent in their most recent ESTIN inspection. So he's well placed to give sound advice as well. Steve Dalton, a very, very interesting character, and some might consider the joker in the pack, but he's no joker. He's a really cutting-edge guy. He is the MD of Sony UK, and he's there with a business brain as well as a weather eye to education and training. And I believe that I'm right in saying that Joyce Redfern and Alison have already been to Sony to be shown around and to get a flavour how he manages, and he's got some incredibly innovative ideas for our kind of situation. And then finally we have Hugh David, who is my equivalent in Bridgend, and Bridgend are significant because they've been used in some senses as a bit of a pilot for certain initiatives, and there's some kind of tie-up between Ceredigion and Bridgend in terms of how they approach the whole business of managing education services particularly. That's where we are. I commented a bit on the background within special measures, ESTIN sent in the Recovery Board, and there's one thing that we should all accommodate right from the start, that as and when, or if, as and when, leave the if out of it, we come out with special measures, it will be a decision taken by ESTIN. But there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure that others will share this view, that it's the Recovery Board who will in fact be making these decisions. ESTIN will take the decisions, the Recovery Board will be making the decisions based on what they see as our progress in the upcoming 12 months or so. The current chair, Joyce Redfern, I've already commented on. There was a bit of a bumpy start because we've had 3 chairs in as many months, but that's settled down now, and Joyce Redfern is installed as the permanent chair of this particular organisation. The changes as far as the personnel from our side of the equation, the council's side of the equation. We have a new executive member for education, that's me, and it's executive member for education rather than executive member for children and young people, because you'll remember at the cabinet meeting a fortnight ago we got a variance in that particular brief. Other changes have been Dermot McChrystal has been confirmed as the interim head of service in that sense, and of course Dave has been installed as the deputy chief executive with overarching control, if you like, of the education service or children and young people. There are 1 or 2 other changes as well. One notable, and I'm sure that you'll all agree with me, this is an inspired choice I think it's hardly promotion, it's a sort of a sideways shuffle, but Lynn Williams has been seconded to an education brief for the next 6 months, and she's already starting to have an effect. I did make the observation yesterday to somebody that she reminds me of Gollum, not the Gollum that he was in Lord of the Rings, because that would be an insult. But Gollum, it's a Yiddish term for a monster that we've created ourselves. And I think that's an apt label to put on Lynn, because she doesn't take any prisoners, and she will do a damn good job, and already is doing that. She's in charge of performance, and she's driving performance across the piece. So we're happy to include her in that raft. The Recovery Board are already fairly happy with the way in which the Cabinet have responded to some of the issues, like school reorganisation, taking tough decisions in that sense, the decision to merge 2 schools into one, and other issues of closure regarding primary schools particularly, and sound judgment in terms of funding choices. This isn't our judgment, by the way, this is the judgment of the Recovery Board. They also are fairly confident that we've done the right thing in terms of the way we are moving forward and progressing, because they've had feedback from meetings with head teachers as well. And they've concluded that head teachers are in favour of change. They've setting up, or in the process of setting up, networks to move knowledge around, sharing knowledge and information. And there is this notion that heads are to lead on improvement in schools. So all in all, there's a bit of a good news feel about it, but it comes with what Ivy and Evans would say, comes with a health warning, because these are very, very early days. In fact, Lynn Williams herself said to me a couple of weeks ago, yes, this is good what they are saying. This was after the last Recovery Board meeting. This is good what they're saying. They appear to be very positive and very up about what we are doing going forward. But we've got little, if anything, to show for it at the moment. And my response was that, well, we haven't got any cakes baked yet, but at least we've lit the oven and we've started the process. And I think that's as good as we can say at the moment. We've started the process. The Recovery Board is a little more optimistic and confident than that. They are saying that they can already see green shoots. They're the people who are going to determine when we come out of special measures, so perhaps their view is not only more optimistic than ours, but perhaps more accurate. A snapshot of where we are then. We've developed closer and more effective partnership working, and a testament to this is the fact that it's almost directly as a consequence of the partnership working that has been set up that we've come out of NEETs. The Recovery Board is very, very impressed with that, so too are Estin. We've had a formal response from Estin on that performance, and they seem to be quite pleased in their rather muted way. We have an interim head of service, as I've already mentioned, Deputy Chief Executive with overarching responsibility for children and young people, the setting up of the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, which also shadows the Recovery Board. And I'll say a little bit about that. Dave will say more about the Children and Young People's Improvement Board in his piece, but suffice it to say for the time being that the plan is, and this is something that is agreed with the Recovery Board, the plan is that over a period of time the Children and Young People Improvement Board will be shadowing the work done by the Recovery Board, and at a stage where the Recovery Board think we are robust enough to stand on our own 2 feet, in short, to come out of special measures, we will still have that safety netting of the Children and Young People's Improvement Board there in situ, as it were. And the reason for this, as much as anything else, is that whilst it's one thing to be coming out of special measures because we've been pursuing a particular line in conjunction with and in agreement with the Recovery Board, what happens when the Recovery Board move away? Is it like a bit of a gas poker under a fire? As long as the gas poker is there, the fire is flaming up the chimney, you take the gas poker out and it all collapses. Now, we don't want to run into that particular situation, so that's possibly the major reason why we have the Children and Young People's Improvement Board actually shadowing. So they will take over, once the Recovery Board moves out of the way, they'll take over that function. We also have an earlier, or in the process at least, an earlier, more rigorous system of intervention in schools deemed to be at risk. We've got the appointment of our own directly employed Head of Schools Improvement Service, Sharon Cross. I've met with and talked to her on several occasions. She is a pretty solid individual. I had a long chat yesterday with Chris Harries, the outgoing EAS Chief of Schools Improvement, and he thinks very, very highly of her. The bonus about having somebody independent that we are paying for is we save money as well, because we haven't got an ongoing cost going out to the EAS. But for my money, one of the, apart from the obvious one, that she is well suited and well qualified for the job of Chief Schools Improvement Officer, she will also be independent of EAS and in a stronger position to scrutinise EAS. I've already suggested to both Dave and Dermot that there is a role, I think, for scrutiny in the fullness of time, to have some kind of an engagement with Sharon Cross around this specific issue of scrutiny, and more specifically the scrutiny of the EAS, because it seems to me that she will be ploughing that furrow, and it would be a ridiculous loss of opportunity if we didn't have a scrutiny team, a function in that. This joins into the next point, really, the beefing up of the role of education scrutiny function. And what I mean by that is that there will be a subcommittee of the scrutiny team with direct responsibility in that respect. So that's the point, will be presumably the point of contact with Sharon Cross. Finally, work is in progress to set in train a system of pupil assessment which is objective and uniformly rolled out across the piece. Now, the reason for this is for us as a local education authority to have stronger and better confidence in the data that we get from assessment and profiling of kids in school. So that's a snapshot of where we are. That's an indicative trawl, if you like, through the Recovery Board. Just to say that already we've seen a radical improvement in our NEETs. A year or so ago we were second from bottom, now we are fourth from top. Dave is in the process of devising all sorts of smart methods for making sure that we don't drop back in that. We are also benefiting, and we have to think of it positively, benefiting from our 4 schools being in Schools Challenge Cymru. Now, I say we have to take it as a positive because we are there, we are where we are. We would prefer, I'm sure, that we didn't have any schools in that bracket, because that would reflect a stronger position in terms of our educational performance. We've also got Challenge, the EAS, that is, have employed 3 or 4 challenge advisors to work closely with these schools. That's Westmont, Abersychan, Fairwater and Lantern throughout the piece. And on this basis, the Recovery Board, both individually and collectively, because I've talked to every one of them individually and I've been in meetings with them collectively, and they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, that they're very, very pleased with the performance that we've managed to achieve so far. It's significant as well, because I'm sure that, that the people, there's nobody from the Welsh Assembly government, that the people at the Welsh Assembly are not as well versed in education strategy and monitoring as the Recovery Board, and indeed as we are. But they are politically very, very astute. They've already had conversations with the chair of the Recovery Board and others, and their position is that they are pleased with the way things are going as well. This isn't, in my view, all down to the Recovery Board, because some of these things were set in train prior to the Recovery Board coming on board, as it were. But they are happy with what we did prior to them coming here. They are happy with what we are doing now since they've been here. That's where I'll finish.
Thank you very much, David. Dave Congreve would like to give us perhaps a brief on the new Children's Board.
Yes, certainly, Chair. I'll just comment very briefly on three things if I can, because I think they're separate but related, and I think it might help the committee in the job of work you've got ahead of you in terms of helping improve through scrutiny and challenge. First thing I'd comment on is just to add to what Councillor Yola said in terms of the Recovery Board. I think the style of the Recovery Board is really important from our point of view. They are very much in the mould of co-producing solutions with us rather than imposing solutions from outside. And I think that's really important, actually. It's a statement about how they feel about our capacity and our ability to improve ourselves. Partly because of that, I think there's a relationship between that and the PAP, which I know you wanted me to specifically comment on. So that relationship is broadly along these lines. The Recovery Board have been keen that we put together a plan for improvement. Now, clearly we've already got the PAP, and I thought it would be useful just to differentiate between those two documents as they are at the moment. So the Recovery Board, as they are co-producing with us, are encouraging us to put together a plan about how do we improve our own capacity. Some of the specific changes that Councillor Yoles referred to are around capacity. Some of the other things are around particular processes for improvement. But where they are important, I think, is that one of the differences between where we are in special measures now and where we were 18 months ago, really, is that when the PAP was put together, that was very much around focusing on the 5 very specific recommendations, the 5 findings for Estin. So it's very, in one level, very narrow in terms of things that it was asking us to focus on and specifically improve. One of the big differences between that and the partnership plan of the Recovery Board is talking about, and it talks about it in your papers, wider and more significant change at a bigger pace. So the Partnership Board are looking for evidence that we've actually understood the things that sit behind those very 5 specific things and are making wider change in terms of the education service. So slightly different things. They are going to come together because I think come together to some extent, part of the discussion we now need with Estin is that the PAP, which was produced at a particular point in time, very focused on those very 5 things, needs possibly to be thought through in terms of A, the progress we've already made, particularly on 2 of those recommendations, and also B, in terms of the fact that we are now working with the Recovery Board in the way that we are working. So the PAP needs a bit of an update and a refresh in that sense. I'll come back to the PAP in a second if I can. So 2 of the 3 things I wanted to comment on very briefly were around the style of the Recovery Board, which I've mentioned, the PAP and the relationship between that and the Recovery Board, which I've touched on. Sorry, yeah, it is on. Sorry, it's probably moving too far away. And then the third thing really was around the Children and Young People's Improvement Board. And I've very little to add to that other than I think Councillor Yole has hit the nail on the head really. The Recovery Board see the Children and Young People's Improvement Board very much in their terms a sister board. That will be the sustainable route out of when the Recovery Board themselves, the members of the Recovery Board have gone. That will be one means by which we hope to sustain the impact and the improvement activities that will make a difference for children and young people. So the way we've kind of tried to think about the agenda for the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, get my teeth in, is to think of it perhaps in 4 particular blocks. One is around assurance. So that board, a bit like scrutiny, needs assurance that we are tackling the right things at the right way. So there's an assurance agenda about making sure we go back and tell people what we are doing on particular pieces of work. There's certainly very much an agenda around attainment and keeping key attainment measures under check and under review, making sure that we're attaining the progress that we particularly want to see, specifically academically, but I think also a little bit wider than that. There's very much an agenda around alignment because it's a partnership-based board. So actually the different things that different partners could be doing or could be doing more effectively together is going to be very much more around that alignment. And that alignment really is around the 4th area of work particularly, which is around all the things that contribute to well-being. So it's quite a broad piece of work. So, very much early days. There is a work plan programmer for the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, which we're hoping to agree. We don't have to agree it with the Recovery Board, but it'd be useful just to get a view on that, and then that can be made available to help inform sort of items that might be appropriate for scrutiny or review from your perspective as well. I'll just return very briefly to the PAP. I mean, the PAP is on the agenda, but I think the key thing from my perspective is to say, and it goes a little bit back to what Councillor Yole was saying, one of the board members who's very I think, very quiet, but also very astute Steve Dalton manages Solar UK and turned that organisation around from a very difficult set of circumstances. His advice was, well, if you want to get out of special measures, change the numbers. He was very blunt around that and saying, well, actually, you can report all you want about activity, and this is my point about the PAP. I'm not going to come here and tell you where we are on the 137 different actions in there. I think, we're happy to have that discussion with you, but I think more importantly, we have changed the numbers on NEETs, which is one of the 5 very specific things. We are making progress on the key stage 4 measures in terms of the projections that we're expecting schools to return, and you may want to return to that in a bit more detail with Dermot or myself as the meeting progresses. But the key to this isn't necessarily have we done all the things on the PAP, it is have we done all the things that we know from the evidence base are going to improve schools. And the most significant thing, I think, as a lesson that comes out of that for me as a non-expert in all of this field of work, is the importance of the school-to-school work that both the EAS will enable and the Recovery Board are going to kind of support particularly strongly. The point being the expertise to improve and significantly develop the outcomes for children and young people isn't going to be developed through imposing solutions. It is going to be developed through getting schools and people with experience and good ideas to work more collaboratively together. I'll leave it there, Chair, if I may, and then obviously we'll take any questions.
Are you happy to take some questions? Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Ron Marchant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the 2 days, if I can sort of term you that. I'm really pleased to hear that we're going to be outcome-based rather than activity-based. But I've actually got 4 very short questions, if you don't mind. The first one, I've been away for a week or more, so I'm not quite up to date on the Lynn Williams thing. What exactly is the remit there in terms of her task and what she's bringing to it? I mean, I'm an outsider from the council as well, point of view, really.
I mean, Lynn's particular experience, you'll know from working with this board, is around helping design and think through the implications of performance management systems and also the effect that good planning of particular activity can have on outcomes. So she's going to help particularly support myself and Dermot on making sure that things that are either in the PAP or, more importantly, in the partnership plan going forward get done on time and in a properly sequenced way. So although we're not going to get kind of religious about monitoring, activity, one of Lynn's particular strengths is to ensure that the activity that's undertaken has a very clear impact and a very clear outcome. So that's where she'll help particularly.
That clarifies it. She's a sort of project expert, in terms of project management. Okay. The next one, when we started the PAP, after the report, we had a stakeholder monitoring group that was sort of, the meetings were on and off because of various delays, and my attendance was equally on and off, I'm afraid to say. Are we reconstituting that, or have we moved on?
I think that's a good question, actually. I think I'd need there would probably be some sense in thinking about whether that group needs to get together again. I think the original terms of reference for that group were a little bit wider than the PAP. They were around sort of an education communications stakeholder group, if you like. So there were a range of things, weren't there, around potentially, I think, the structure of the education service was one of the things that got a very good airing at that point in time. I think the idea about whether we need to return to a stakeholder-based group is something that perhaps I need to reflect on. I think one of the things that we've got to be very conscious of, we've got a recovery board, we've got a children and young people's improvement board, we're going to have various sort of subcommittees set up, and we've just got to think, we've also got the LSB interested in this agenda, so we've just got to think about what goes where. But I like the idea, of a stakeholder.
And the last one is actually, you've already touched upon it, really. I was going to ask about the composition and ongoing remit of the Children and Young Persons Improvement Board, its relationship to the Scrutiny Committee, and obviously, as you've added, its relationship to any stakeholder group. Because I agree with you, we don't want to create bureaucracies where they're not needed, but we need clarity of...
Absolutely. It might be helpful if following this meeting we circulate the terms of reference and the current membership of the Children and Young People's Improvement Board. I mean, I think one of the things that we're committed to doing is just keeping an eye on all parts of the machinery, because I think it becomes very easy to set something up and then think, well, actually, we haven't recognised how quickly the world's changed around us, and it does change very, very quickly in education.
So what is the composition, sorry?
So essentially, you've got the chair is the Chief Executive, I think, will become Councillor Yole after the first couple of cycles of meeting. Myself, Dermot, as the two principal lead officers from the Council's perspective, and then largely senior executives, in the sense of officer executives, from most of the partnership organisations. So you'll have the Director of Planning and Commissioning for the ABHB, you'll have the local lead for the police, who's just changed, for example, and people of that ilk. So I have got all the names and I'll circulate those around. Yeah.
We've also got who's very, very gifted and a very useful member of the organisation as well.
Some members can be circulated with the
Yes.
terms of reference and the makeup of the board. Any other questions, members? Sorry, Councillor Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Two, if I could. One that might be a bit odd, really, but it struck me that this board's called the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, and yet we seem to be moving back towards an educational basis for, like, the role of the executive member. Can you explain to me why that sort of oddness appears there?
I'm not sure I can explain exactly why. I think the issue for us is that actually, from an officer point of view, we recognise that, probably position this in the sense of thinking about this in two halves. We've got an agenda around attainment, which is very much around the recovery board. I mean, the recovery board is wider than that, but they are going to focus very much around attainment. We've also got an agenda around well-being, and I think it's there really that the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, because it is a partnership-based approach, will come to the fore. I don't think we've got perfect, I don't think we've ever had perfect alignment between, and I don't think actually politically you've necessarily sought it, perfect alignment between kind of the officer responsibilities and those of the executive. And I'm not sure you would probably ever get that given the wide range of issues that impact on children and young people's well-being. Does that help?
Yeah. Could I add something, Glenn?
Sorry.
Sorry? Is it permissible for me to add something, Chair? Thank you very much. I think in part the rationale behind the changes, because you're right, in a very superficial way, there is that out-of-stepness, that incongruity, if you like. But one of the earlier meetings with the Recovery Board, and I think it was probably the first meeting with the Recovery Board that I attended, they were asking questions like, why have you got all of these things in the brief of education? Do you not think there might be some kind of parallel between that, or some kind of connection between that and poor performance? And it grew out of that. The Recovery Board were quizzing us, not dictating, but quizzing us, and we had a pretty robust exchange over it. I think it was the session that we had with the Cabinet and the Recovery Board back in March. I think it was end of March. That was long before I came into this role. And the central piece of the debate that we were having then, in very general terms at that point, was that there seemed to be an over-ambitious brief and an over-ambitious set of targets to do with that particular brief. And it might very well be less cumbersome and more successful if there was a more focused view on education per se. That was one aspect of it. The other aspect, and this is to square the circle in terms of the incongruity that was implicit in your question, is the notion that we readily agreed with, because it was something that we had talked about previously amongst ourselves before the Recovery Board came on the scene, about this notion that education on its own was too precious, their language, not ours, and too important, not for everybody in the organisation to have some kind of a handle on it. What they were saying was that chief officers right across the piece, we should be plundering their expertise and allowing them to focus in part on education. In short, they were saying that educational performance and attainment was everybody's responsibility. And in that sense, why wouldn't you trawl the expertise of other chief officers? in an attempt to progress education. So there's a sense where, on the one hand, they were saying you need to perhaps trim the sails in terms of that brief to allow the exec member to focus specifically on education per se, and then running parallel to that, they were saying that it would be good, wouldn't it, and we readily agreed, that everybody in the organisation that could, should, have some kind of an input, some kind of a view and focus on education. Now, a corollary of that, or an extension of that, and this is contained within this reference to beefing up of scrutiny, although in this instance is beefing up of performance review, because next week we have in the first session in a new venture in terms of performance review, and this goes right to the root of what the Recovery Board and us were having as a dialogue. During this dialogue, it emerged that in other local authorities, in Ceredigion, for example, and Bridgend, two amongst several, scrutiny or performance review wasn't done like it's done here. That is, one-to-one. You have each chief officer in. What the other authorities were doing was having a collective performance review, where all chief officers, all executive members were around the table and effectively scrutinised and reviewed the performance of each other. Now, at the time, I couldn't see how this might work. But if you think about it, it's got potential. I said at the time that I would be happy to endorse that as the executive member for corporate governance, as long as it wasn't instead of, but as well as, which would make more work for chief officers, that's for certain, because they have to attend more meetings. But so be it. Now, in that sense, and that's the reason why this summer's one-to-one performance reviews were cancelled in favour of a collective approach, and this will be some kind of experiment, if you like, and if it works, we will be running that alongside the one-to-one performance reviews. A bit of a long-winded way of explaining, but I'll tie it up to your original question. I think it's in keeping with this notion that collectively, corporately, we need to have a handle on education. In short, to leave education to the education department is not necessarily the best way to go. And if you look at it from a purely financial point of view, if we are spending in excess of 50% of our budget on education, why wouldn't the whole of the senior management team, why wouldn't every one of the chief officers want to have a say in and have some kind of an input in monitoring the situation? I would.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one more thing.
Can I just bring in?
Yes.
Councillor Jeffries.
Thanks a lot. Well, first of all, it's great to see you, and I hope we'll be seeing a lot more of you at the scrutiny meetings. I think it's very important that the executive members attend to give a proper briefings, which I think you've done today.
Well,
so I'll go on as I've...
Yeah. Just respond, I'm in a position to say no to that, because when I was a scrutiny chair, it was a constant theme that I was pushing, so I would be a hypocrite if I tried to dig out of it now.
Great. What I'd like to ask you is, as you say, you're new to the role. What kind of management style are you bringing to it, and what's the reason for that at this time?
I think you well know the answer to that. I don't necessarily support the view that 25 years teaching experience is the perfect fit for this function. You have people in the education department, Dermot, John Tushenham, Darren Joseph, and maybe many, many more. They're not in, I wouldn't have said it if he was in here. No. So I don't think that an educational background is necessarily that useful. It's useful in one respect. I have some handle on how teachers behave and the psyche of teachers and the periodic preciousness of teachers, but that doesn't get you too far in this job. This job is essentially a political one. And I see it as whilst wanting to work and work amicably with the people that I have to work with, Dermot and the others that I've mentioned, and Dave now, because Dave is effectively the head of the education brief in that sense. I think what I bring to it is a degree of robustness of purpose, a capacity and willingness to ask awkward questions and to poke about and pry in what might be considered off-limits, dark recesses, and so on and so forth. And if it means making a nuisance of myself, then making a nuisance of myself as well. I have a track record in doing all of those things. I hope that isn't all I was asked to do this job for. I think that I am capable of having a deft touch as well as a blunt touch. And I think the people that I'm dealing with are robust enough in themselves to take the rough and tumble of that kind of delivery and that kind of approach. So there we have it. Time alone will tell whether or not it's a successful raft of...
Just one.
What about performance measures? What kind of performance measure should we judge you on? How successful you've been in, let's say, 12 months' time?
Well, you could be more generous and give me 15 months, and that would take us over to 21st of August. But I think clearly there's a series of stepping stones here. I would like to think that our results on the 21st of August this year would see an improvement. The indicators suggest that there will be some small improvement. But I would hate to think that we would be judged on that indicator alone. But certainly I would expect over a period of maybe 15, 18 months, if there's no visible improvement, then I would certainly want to reconsider my position. The awful truth is that there aren't that many formal or official hurdles or indicators between now and then, only the two major ones of the consecutive Augusts. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's a tricky question, because there's a hell of a lot that we are doing. There's a hell of a lot that's being put in place, and it will take time for that to work through the system. I would like to think that we will succeed over a period of time, and although I won't be able to take the credit for that, because it will be in the truest sense a team performance, then a difficult one, a very, very awkward question, and I wonder whether or not I've answered it.
I was diverting quite a bit from the agenda item, which was the PAP. Can I bring in Dave Congreve?
Comments. I think the key points, I mean, without extending the debate, I think the key point is actually one of the things that's come back from Estin is that I think they've learnt that 12 months isn't long enough to see the type of improvement that we intend to make in education here in Torfaen over the next 2 to 3 years. In your papers, you've got, in the commissioning paper, you've got the sort of longer term strategic goals you want to see. In terms of markers of progress, I think, just go back to what Steve Dalton said, there are two sets of numbers that particularly we need to keep a very close eye on, and I think can be judged against. One is the percentage of young people who become NEET, and there's extended set of measures around that. For me, success looks like anything below 3.2. We've set a very, very demanding aspirational target, but if we look at our level of deprivation in the community and adjust that target down, anything below about 3.2% is good performance from our point of view. It will be a lot less than that if we are successful. And the second set of measures, I think, is around the Key Stage 4. Now, there's lots of issues, I think, that, again, are hinted at in the papers and are explicit in places in the papers you've got in front of you about, why is it that Key Stage performance declines over a period of time? You end up with Key Stage 4 performance poorer than you would expect if you looked back over Foundation, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 type measures. So I think Key Stage 4 is important, but understanding the context of that, I think, is an important part of the things that we will be accountable for with others over the next 12 months. But I would say, like Councillor Yola say, if we can do, I think we've got a set of results that are coming up that are going to be hugely important. I suspect from the information we've had from Dermot that has been kind of gathered from the work we do with the EAS that those will be good for Torvine in the context of where we expect it to be and where others would expect us to be. More important, really, is how we motor on from there, given all the additional support. And I just say this because I think it's important to the discussion you're going to have. There's an awful lot more resources. So we've got Schools Challenge Cymru resources that are additional to the EAS additional plan. You've got quite a lot of £2.1 million worth of pupil deprivation funding in Torvine, which is aimed at closing the gap of the attainment gap of the poorest students, poorest pupils. The EAS is going to work on a series of standardised models that have been proven elsewhere. So we shouldn't we, if we've got better evidence base and we've got more resources, see a bigger increase in performance. So this year, I think, we'll be reflecting what's largely gone. The year after that, I think, will be a really litmus test of how good that improvement is and how well embedded it is across ourselves, individual schools and the EAS. So I think it is slightly longer than the 12-month frame that you've put on it. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Councillor Cameron, did you wish? Councillor Cameron?
Just a quick question. In your short time with responsibility for education, I'm sure it's something you've done, have you discovered why we were so shocked, really, to find the situation we were in, and what do you feel is the way forward? I know it's early days yet, and you've touched on it in some of the things you've said, but have you found out why, really, we were so shocked with being put into special measures?
I wasn't shocked. And I purely objectively, because we were given a period of time, we were identified as being weak or underperforming in 5 areas, and we were given 12 months to come out of that. And at the end of that 12 months, we hadn't addressed those 5 areas in the robust way that we were expected to. A caveat to that is that my understanding is that now in these circumstances, Estin are a little more generous in the time span that they allow for recovery. And I think it's something that Dave referenced earlier on. So I wasn't shocked, because if you look at it purely objectively, if you have 5 areas that you're failing in, and you have a certain amount of time officially to put it right, and you don't put it right, then the consequences are what they are. And I think people look at these things understood that the consequences would be this if this wasn't put in place. So there was no shock. I'm not going to talk any more about how and why and whatever happened, because that's a sterile argument. The thing that we all need to focus on now, and I think that we are doing it admirably with the Recovery Board, is to concentrate on how we get out of the position that we were in. And I think we've successfully started that, albeit long, journey out of that. So rather than focus on the whys and the question marks over what went on, that's behind us, because we could come to the definitive answer of what happened, but it doesn't put us in any stronger position to move forward, and that's what we need to concentrate on.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there are any other questions, Can I say a big thank you to Dave Congreve and to Councillor Yole for coming along this afternoon. We know you've had a very busy morning, so thank you very much once again. It's very informative. I'm sure members will agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will be inviting you again, just to be warned. We will be.
Chair, could I just clarify, because Lynn was due to present a paper today. She's away from the office today, so I know I'm presenting the paper on her behalf. Would you like me to stop for the meeting, or do you want to return for that item? The paper is on the subcommittee.
Would you be happy to bring that item forward?
Oh,
so that
he wasn't asking to bring it forward, he wants to hang around.
Yes, but if you wouldn't mind, would you?
You do it now, or I'm happy to return it, whichever way suits you, Chair.
What do you wish, members? Do you wish to discuss it now, or do you wish...
Okay, that'd be helpful, thank you. Okay, if I can take you then to agenda item number 7.
Agenda item 7.
Page 102, if I can find it.
Pages 102.
Yeah, thank you. It's a fairly brief report, Chair, and it's fairly self-explanatory, but I think it does follow on quite nicely from the update just given by the executive member, really, in terms of some of the discussions we've been having about what are the things that support school-to-school working and school improvement. So the purpose of this report is to request that the committee considers establishing a subcommittee of this Overview and Scrutiny Committee to particularly scrutinise individual school performance together with the support that schools individually receive from the EAS and the local education authority, us as the council. So that's the purpose of the report. The recommendations I'll just run through before I give a little bit of the background. The recommendation is to establish a subcommittee, as I said, specifically to focus on individual school performance, that the subcommittee should consist of the chair of the Learning and Overview Scrutiny Committee, together with a small group of interested members, and that interest should be notified formally, which we can cover in the report, and that members of that committee submit their interest to sit on the subcommittee to the chair, and the chair is given delegated authority to select which members should be appointed to it. Background really has been covered in the previous update, other than probably to sort of mention that over the past year the Recovery Board has been set up, and this is one of the discussions that they've had, really, is to focus on the types of things that some of the local authorities are doing, and Councillor Yole gave an example of a comprehensive performance assessment, an idea we picked up from Bridgend. A number of other local authorities that the chair of the Recovery Board has worked with have subcommittees specifically to look at and drive the understanding of individual school performance, and that was part of the discussion that was had at the Recovery Board, hence this proposal. I'm assuming that members will have gone through the report in a bit of detail, so if I just take you to 6.1, suggested really that, as I've already said, should consist of the chair, six members in total including the chair, to include one Co-op D member, determined by interest, but will be subject to the rules of political balance. Membership of the subcommittee should be reviewed on an annual basis following annual council. All members of the subcommittee provided with appropriate training and support, and I know that Lynn is looking at the brief for that training and support at the moment, to enable them to understand and challenge school performance data effectively, because that can be quite a complex area. Work programme should be informed by or through a conversation with myself and others, but principally the purpose is to look at individual school performance on an exception basis. So that would be both good and bad. If we have schools that are doing exceptionally good work and we want to promote school-to-school working, then this would be one mechanism of looking at what sits behind that. Equally, if we have schools that are of a particular concern, then this would be another mechanism for helping a wider group of members engage and understand in some of those issues. Should operate in line with the rules set out for the Council's constitution. There'll be a standard set of information when we are considering school performance that Lynn will advise on based on her work with other local authorities, and that recommendations and findings go back to the executive member and to the interim head of education service for consideration, action and discussion with schools. I think that covers most of the important contents of the report, Chair. A couple of comments on risks that are there that are relatively self-explanatory, and as I've mentioned, I think it is Lynn Williams who will be overseeing and driving forward the implementation of this report should you approve it today, Chair.
Members, do you have any comments or questions?
I do, in fact, sorry.
Ron Mark.
Yeah, I had one comment until you said something that made me a little bit worried, Dave. The one comment I had was that we would need to manage conflict of interest. At the beginning of this meeting, everything was regarded as general. We are going to have a situation now where virtually every potential member may be on the governing body of a school that will periodically come before that committee. So that will need to be managed, particularly to make sure that there's no one time where actually the number of people who are able to take part shrinks to a small number. But the one that worried me, and maybe I misunderstood you, when you said that we'd have a standard set of information. This is going to be coming up in the next item with Dermot. You're not talking about the judgmental criteria, because I hope, because we have ESTIN, we have the EAS banding. The statistical information that shows the school being of concern or excellent, I would very much hope are the same sorts of data items that go into the other assessments, not a parallel stream.
No, it's not. It will be existing information and data taken in the same way for each report. So, yeah, it'll be existing information, yeah.
Can I ask, is Lynn looking at the legal position for members? Would there be a sort of a blanket dispensation?
I'll have to perhaps, I was going to defer to others, but they're not here. I haven't had the ability to have that conversation with Lynn. I'm assuming so. I know that she's looked at how other local authorities have set up similar arrangements, so I'm sure that the point that Ron's made, I think, will apply to every local authority, I'm sure, so I'm sure Lynn will have accounted for that.
Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you, Chair. Under school performances, Dave, could I just ask that whichever school has improved or schools that will improve, that the pupils and staff get the recognition that they deserve, tell the good story of, what's happened, because there's been so much negativity about the pupils and their performance that they are bound to be feeling a little bit low. So I think some good stories coming out of whatever happens now, would boost the pupils' performance.
I'm sure it's a sort of a general comment. I can take that back to the exec member. One of the things that we've got to get right through the recovery board is our communications plan, and I think it's exactly that. We are focusing on a lot of things that we need to change. Inevitably, that puts you focus on the things that are wrong rather than right. We've got to get that balance. I appreciate the comment you're making, yeah.
Just draw you back then to recommendation. Are you happy then to agree to establish a subcommittee and the makeup of the subcommittee? All in agreement? Thank you. Obviously, members would have to declare an interest. It did say that to myself. Could that be done as soon as possible? Because I think we do need to arrange training, and I think we would like to be up and running, I think, in the autumn. So if the members are interested, they could make their interest known as soon as possible. It would be great. Okay.
If I could ask that under the training, that the school data performances, was given, a good airing, that a panel member understands how the data is worked.
I think, I know that we will be working very closely with Lynn Williams on this, so I think we can be assured of the best possible training.
Well, I just asked, it was one I tried to get in before we made the decision, but I don't disagree with the decision at all, of course. It seems to me, looking at the national guidelines around the EAS at the moment, that although peppered all through that document are the word school improvement, the intention is that they are more engaged in challenge than actual improvement, and that the improvement itself will come by schools. And obviously we've now taken on a school improvement officer here, so obviously do you see this subcommittee as having a role around coordinating that improvement role between the EAS and the authority?
I think the way that we've envisaged it is that this subcommittee would focus very much on individual school performance at a point in time. So just going back to what I was saying earlier on, if there's something particularly good, I think it's or something that we are we would want to understand in a lot more detail about a particular school's performance. I think that's the role of this individual subcommittee. What will come out of those deliberations clearly is to sort of say, right, well, actually, when you've looked at the factors that sit behind that performance, it may well be that actually you form a view as a committee that actually a different form of interventional support could have been more appropriate from the EAS's point of view. And that's the sort of commentary that you'll feed back. And in turn, that will help us then get the annual commissioning process with the EAS a little bit tighter as we develop through that. So I think that hopefully answers your question. I mean, I don't see this as being the...
Well, no, but as I understand it now, with the EAS role moving towards challenge, school improvement will come from good schools teaching bad school. Well,
I think I'd probably just sort of say, I mean, I know that, you know, I can understand why you may have just sort of gone, right, well, you know, EAS is all about challenge. Well, actually, the EAS is about challenge and support and business. So when you look at their business model, and again, you've got some papers on this, they talk about having 3 pillars to their new structure. Those pillars are around challenge. They're also around the business support, which looks at the processes that enable a school to improve, and also then around the type of things that they can broker for school-to-school support. So I wouldn't necessarily say the EAS is all about challenge. I would say the EAS is very much about seeing support and challenge in equal measure, but it's a proportionate model. Those schools that need more of one than the other, based on the judgments that have been made, that's what the EAS will deliver.
Okay, Tom, did you wish to make a comment there?
Yeah, again, having spoken to Lynn, I think the ethos of this subcommittee is not just to pin it all on the school, but to look at the school, the local authority and the EAS together and work out, you know, where the problem is. So it's not just about scrutinising the school, but looking at the whole system and who's making, you know, what contribution to improvement.
Could I ask a quick question, very quick?
Ron March.
Sorry, just a quick question. Are you looking at one school per meeting? Is that the...
I think that's the intention, Chair.
That's going to be quite a long cycle, isn't it?
It could be, which is why I think we are sort of saying, right, well, actually, you know, there'll be some schools. If you take the national model, what the national model will do is highlight those schools that actually we should be most concerned about in terms of, you know, their current performance or their prospects going forward. And I think it's that type of in-depth understanding of exactly what Thomas just sort of said. How can we get more from the school? How can the EAS contribute more to that discussion? What else does the LEA need to do? That will be the focus. So, yeah, it would be, if we intended to visit every school, a very long cycle. But I think, you know, it is very much by exception, you know.
Okay, members. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you, Chair.
Ready to move on to agenda item 6, which is the commissioning arrangements with the EAS. And we need Dermot McChrystal, the interim head, to take us through the report. Can we first of all apologise for keeping you waiting, but it did make sense that a few of the items followed on, so we are sorry. Okay, members, we refer then back to agenda item 6. You can see there the subject commissioning arrangements with the EAS, and this is to inform the committee of the changes within the EAS structure and Torvine Education Service, and to provide the context in which we might wish to identify activities we might like to scrutinise. Could you give us a very brief introduction?
Fine, Chair. I was just going to ask, do you want me just to give you the very brief headlines and then invite questions and do it from there? Clearly, the paper goes through in some detail, and there were quite some detailed appendices that give you a range of information, including the restructure of the EAS, a paper written by Steve Davis for the Directors of Education and for the Joint Executive Group, as well as the commissioning paper that we've put together that we'll be finalising hopefully later this week, myself, Dave Congreve and Steve Davis. But in short, the paper, if I direct your attention to section 5 and the key changes to the EAS and local authority education staff, really this section is about We've learned a lot this year in our relationship with the EAS, and we've recognised that there are a number of changes that we need to make. One of those is the Principal Systems Leaders post, which was an additional commission to the EAS that was made just over a year ago, around a year ago. We now recognise that that's probably caused some confusion. Certainly when I've appeared in front of committee before, there was some concern, I think, is the right way of putting it, that how can we hold an organisation to account using someone who in effect is embedded within that organisation. So how independent can they be? I'd just like to put on record, though, that Chris Harries, who's been the Principal Systems Leader, has been an incredibly helpful colleague who's worked with the local authority within the EAS and certainly has pushed our progress very firmly forward. But we've now recognised that that post doesn't need to continue and, in fact, probably inhibits the local authority's ability to fulfil its own statutory functions. So Chris has resigned his role with the EAS. That's something that he came to a decision by himself. And he'll continue to work with the EAS, and they've brought him back. He's a very sought-after consultant across the UK, and I can reassure committee he's got lots of work lined up already. We've brought him in for really a couple of days a week for the coming term to make sure that we've continuity going forward. Together with the Recovery Board, we had a discussion about, well, what did we need to put in place in Torvine so that we could be sure we're getting good value for money from the EAS and that our schools are improving. We've agreed and have already gone ahead and appointed a Head of School Improvement. As detailed in your paper, that's Sharon Cross. She's she's a serving head teacher at the moment in a successful school in Wiltshire. And Sharon's already had a couple of taster days with us and has come with us on a visit to Ceredigion when we went to see what that excellent authority was doing in terms of what we could learn from them, and has already started her induction with us. So she'll be joining us in September and will in effect take on the more traditional head of school improvement role. So her role will be very much about how do we, so that's a member of the Education Service team employed by the Council. I should say, by the way, of course, we're not paying the EAS that additional funding anymore. That's coming back in to the local authority. So Sharon Cross's role will be to make sure that the quality assurance within the ES is there. We're seeing the quality of what they do for us across Challenge Advisors roles is consistent, and that we have the information that we need in a timely basis to make decisions about what we want to see the ES deliver on our behalf within year. One of the significant criticisms I think that we have to accept is justified is that we haven't been in a position to really scrutinise school performance within year. We've had to wait really until the end of the academic year to see summary information come out. We have therefore not been able to really hold to account and change the commission with the EAS in a way that really is sustainable. So you'll see in the paper, in the appendices that are also attached, a timescale, a timetable, which indicates that from this term forward, from the new term forward, the EAS will now be collecting information on school performance on a termly basis and reporting to us on that school performance and also the quality of teaching and leadership in schools. So how pupils are making progress towards the targets as well as the quality of teaching and leadership in each of our schools, thus enabling scrutiny to get more regular reports, and obviously the Education Service to make sure that we've got far more up-to-date information on how schools are doing so we can intervene and support schools where they need it, and also to discuss with the EAS which schools need different support perhaps than from that which was originally agreed. So, Chair, I think that's a very quick summary of what's in Section 5. And I think I've covered also aspects of Section 6 as well. The other thing then to point out is that the EAS is restructuring its own internal staffing structure. And again, you've got a paper there from the EAS. What that means in effect is that the EAS will have its own principal systems leader, so a lead senior officer for each local authority, who will be our main point of contact, and internal to the EAS will be the person who quality assures what they're doing. So that means rather than have to go through the IT system called School Secure to find information and try and extract that information from quite a complicated system, we'll have one point of contact who will also be joined by what's currently been called an accounts manager, who will also be able to tell us all the different services and activities that our schools are accessing through the EAS, giving us a much more joined up and clear picture of school activity and the impact of that activity that schools are doing and that EAS is supporting them with in terms of getting better outcomes for pupils. In 6.3, and I won't read through this, we've tried to outline what those meetings with EAS going forward will look like. What we've tried to do there is to reflect the paper, sorry, not the paper, but the recommendations that were expressed back in the end of January 2014 when David Hopkins joined committee. So we're trying to resonate some of the advice that committee was given then in what we're now doing in terms of building in those meetings with EAS and how we're changing our relationship with them. It's important to say at this point that this I see is a refinement of our relationship with the EAS. We're very confident that the quality of service that we're getting in terms of the school improvement service we're getting is still much better than what we had previously, and this is another iteration in that relationship, and we think that's a significant improvement. The draft commission, as I think I've already said, Chair, is going to be hopefully finalised this Friday. Just in terms of, to be absolutely clear, the business plan for the consortia for the EAS is approved by the Minister. You've got a copy of that in your documents as well, and there's still some further work the EAS are doing on that. The annex to the Commission is what I'm really referring to in terms of the Commission. Now, that isn't required to be submitted this year. So what we're doing, in effect, is getting ahead of the game. It's not until next year that those have to be submitted to the Minister. But clearly that's already influencing our discussions with the EAS, and that's our expectation of what will be delivered from September. So, Chair, I think, unless you want me to go into any more detail, that gives a very brief summary of the paper.
Okay, members, are you ready to move into questioning? Sorry, Councillor Seaborn.
Before we start the main questioning, Chair, could I just ask Dermot, you mentioned Sharon Cross. Could I ask, or are we allowed to ask what type of school she comes from? Is it primary, secondary school? How many pupils did she, was she in charge of, etc.?
Yeah, Sharon's currently teaching in a primary school in Wiltshire. That's quite a small primary school. The school, when she joined it, was in some difficulty, and that school is now on its road from good, where it's already characterised, to excellent. We, as part of the interview process, involved a secondary colleague in that interview process, because clearly some schools will think, if that person's not from my phase of education, I might be concerned about, are they able to talk to me about issues that are relevant? Clearly, where we are in our relationship with schools at the moment, which we can probably touch on in some of the questions I've no doubt will come up, because we've seen some significant improvements in the relationship with schools over the last few months. The secondary colleague was very reassured that the responses to the questions around assessment, around how we would support schools to know themselves better, around the use of data, about assessment for learning, were absolutely pertinent to secondary and primary. We felt very confident that although Sharon has a primary background, her experience is absolutely relevant to the context across Torvine.
The reason I asked, Chair, was because there's a difference in budget setting from primary to secondary schools and pupil attainments, exams and things. But if you are happy, then...
Chair, what I would say is that it's always one of those issues about if we get a secondary colleague in one of these posts, then it's the same issue with primary. It's highly unlikely, remember, and of those of you who are governors on secondary schools will know, that what we're prepared to pay for someone in that post is highly unlikely to attract a deputy head from the secondary school, because it will mean a pay cut in many instances. So the reality is lots of heads of school improvement and school improvement professionals often come from primary backgrounds for that reason.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the report? If not, we can then move into our scrutiny questioning. Councillor Nigel Davis.
Dermot, if we can go to page 35 and item 6.1. A few words are used, and reference is made to proportionality and the accuracy of assessment and moderation. Now, in this context, what does that actually mean?
Thank you. I'm looking for those exact words in section 6.1.
In the last paragraph.
Sorry, yes. Thanks for that. This really picks up on a piece of work we actually are doing with a group of primary and secondary schools at the moment. At the last recovery board, we were asked to present a paper on how well our schools are doing and where we think they will be in relation to the targets that were set earlier in the year, where they'll be at the end of this year. Now, as part of that paper, bearing in mind recommendation 1 in the Aston inspection for the local authority, said that we should focus, we've more work to do in terms of school standards, clearly, particularly into Key Stage 4. But the word particularly I wanted to pick up on, because what Aston was saying to us is that it's not just Key Stage 4 is the issue, there are issues across the piece. So I presented a paper with head teachers in the room, looking at the reported attainment levels from foundation phase all the way through to Key Stage 4. And when we look at that data, it would appear that from foundation phase and Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, our performance is much, much more significantly advanced of where we are at Key Stage 4. And that raises a number of questions then about the validity of that data. It doesn't mean that the data is not valid. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It simply is noteworthy that our performance, where teacher assessment is the methodology for reporting school performance, that's then quite different from what's happening at Key Stage 4. Added into that, the fact that we can look at the discrepancy between the national testing and the previous testing that we did in Torvine ourselves, that was something that all schools bought into. Well, actually we bought the test for them, but all schools were taking part in, where we looked at reading and I think reading and number. So there were some quite significant differences. So what I was flagging up to the recovery board and to heads, and I think reflecting back to head teachers is, rather than flagging up, is that we do have a question mark over how valid those results are. And that if we're really serious about school improvement, we can't just be thinking about Key Stage 4 teachers in schools. We've got to be looking at the validity of our data across the piece if we're going to truly know ourselves. So that's really what that's flagging up. So there's now a piece of work underway with head teachers. In fact, again, we're meeting for the second time before the end of term. That's involving, I think, 3-4 secondary heads and an equal number of primary heads as a focus group to come together to look at that problem and to come up with some possible solutions of what, how we collectively as an education community can have more assuredness of the validity of that data. We're planning a conference for head teachers on the 25th of September, which will really be more of a workshop now to look at how we can agree what our assessment process should look like and moderation, and hopefully have more confidence.
So just to, I still don't see a proportionality comes in. Well, I get assessment. I'm still a bit unclear about proportionality and moderation in this context.
I think proportionality here is that we do have a moderation process already in place. Is it commensurate with the need that we have? And the answer has to be no. Therefore, really what we're trying to summarise in that paragraph, and I'll take on board that we need to make that more explicit next time, is the fact that we really need to get to grips. And do we really have confidence in the system as it is? And at the moment, the methodology that we have doesn't seem to be fit for purpose to give everyone the assurance that we need.
Thank you very much. Can I bring in, Councillor Karen and then Councillor Marchant. Ron Marchant, sorry. sorry.
No, I've listened carefully to that, David, and you know, I've been in this business quite a long period of time. I've always heard the view that there's an 8-week gap between primary and secondary, so there's this issue of the children forgetting some of the education that they had when they ended in primary and before they began in secondary. I've also heard the view that 15, 16 years of age is a very difficult time for teenagers when there are a lot more exciting things to be doing than Key Stage 4 exams. So, basically, I suppose what I'm asking is I can understand what you're saying about the data, but have we compared our data to other authorities to see if they have these issues between primary and secondary and this issue between Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4?
The simple answer is yes. I mean, how to answer this? Yeah, we've looked at the comparison. Eston have also looked at the comparison and are very keen to point out to us that the discrepancy between teacher assessment in Torvine and the results of the first cohort of national data is one of the most significant discrepancies in Wales. So that raises, there's a real danger here that we immediately doubt all of the really good work that lots of our schools have done in moving standards forward. And Eston, the same organisation who are pointing out the discrepancy, are also, as councillors will see from Torvine talks and from feedback from ourselves, lots of our schools have just come through Eston really well, having good, having excellent in a couple of cases. So we know there was some very effective practice in place, and that reconfirms what we know ourselves from our own systems. But there has to be a question mark hanging over this. I don't think that's explained by the summer holidays. I don't think that's explained by the normal process of maturation and the challenges that brings for all learners. I think it's more to do with how confident can we have in the validity of those assessments, sometimes within schools, so that where you've got double form entry, for example, or more in secondary schools, that a level 4 is a level 4 across all those classes, as well as then between schools as well. So we have to reassure ourselves as council that those systems are robust. Otherwise, none of us can really know where the performance of our schools is. So that's the exercise that we're engaged in at the moment.
Okay. Ron Marchant.
Dermot probably knows this, but where I come from, it is about effective moderation, ideally as independent as you can get it, national test. But the significance for it in terms of target setting for me is that data at Key Stage 2 and so on is used to set the Fisher Trust targets on which the whole teaching plan is based. And then the whole thing goes upside down. I nearly said something ruder, because that original data was not actually an accurate reflection of that pupil's attainment at the time. So it really, that moderation and assessment, it really is essential.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure you are aware that sometimes we may feel that there's pressure on teachers to perhaps, if somebody is borderline, put them to the next one because it looks better. Are you aware of how we make sure that this doesn't happen in Torvine?
In short, yes. And I suppose the question that I'm raising is that are we satisfied with the current systems? And the answer is no. So there is some very good practice out there, we know that. Is it consistent across the piece? I don't think our systems that we've commissioned through the EAS are yet robust enough. Taking up Ron's point about independence, one of the things that we'll look at with head teachers is how can we introduce an element of random sampling. Just to give, now this is not really the pains to point this out to committee, this is not about catching people out. This is about supporting professional development and individual teachers and schools' ability to accurately assess their children's performance. Because if they can't accurately assess performance, they can't successfully plan the next teaching phase. So that's critical to successful teaching. So we will. That's really what we're working with. It's about a quarter of our heads who are actually involved in the subgroup coming together to look at what's the best methodology. I mentioned that we've been up to Ceredigion to look at that local authority. Obviously, the Director of Education there sits on our recovery board, and they've just had excellent in their Eston inspection as an authority. And we've learned a lot from that visit, and we think, if it doesn't sound too arrogant, there's other things that we can do as well, because we've been looking at other practice. So we know we can improve further. It isn't robust enough yet. So more on that, I think, after the 25th of September when we have that piece of work with the heads.
Just quickly, I was glad to hear you say there about random checking. I don't feel that's anything wrong, checking it, because I think sometimes the teachers possibly would err on the cautious side and go lower, but if they can be pressurised slightly to go higher, they would find it difficult to justify. And I know that some of them can feel that. So I'm glad to hear you would randomly check.
Chair, it's just very important to add to this. This is something that we need to do together. This is not something that we're trying to introduce another inspectorate for schools. This is a co-constructed model that we want schools to buy into and embrace and take further as well. So I just want to come back to that.
Okay. Kerry Prendergast?
Each term, could we be given a notice in advance of which schools the EAS intend to target, and a rough date of when they are likely to be visiting, and the type of information they'll be collecting or the type of interventions they are planning? Of course, the timetable can change during the term, but knowing what they plan to do, I think, would be helpful. And at the end of each term, then we could have a checklist of which schools they intended to go, did they do it, what did they plan to do in advance, and did they do that or something different? So that's what I'm saying, could we have a checklist, timetable, each term to keep us informed and up to speed?
Chair, what I would say to that is that obviously all schools are going to be visited every term. So there's depending on the categorisation of schools, as committee will know, the National Model for School Improvement will see the categorisation of all schools, primary and secondary, in September. Schools who are in category 3 and 4 will clearly have significant intervention over and above schools in the higher two categories, and will be subject to an intervention plan. So I think what we can do, and again it's in some of the detail in the appendices, is our intention is to bring a termly report, or as close to a termly report as possible, from the EAS, looking at what they have done and what impact that's had across all schools. Obviously, in terms of the minutiae of every visit and what they intend to do, that would make for quite a lengthy report for you. So what I'd propose is, I think what you're asking actually is very sensible, and what we're intending to do internally is to look at the compliance of what they've said they're going to do and then make sure that they've done it. Clearly, we also want to look at the impact of that, because it's one thing turning up in a school and having the visit. We're more interested in making sure that the children then are reaching their targets or are on track to. So we intend to bring termly reports. We're just in the business of negotiating the dates of that with the EAS. In fact, to be fair, they asked for scrutiny dates themselves so they could make sure that information is available. And we'll make sure there's an activity report or an activity element of what they said they were doing, have they done it, as well as an impact element in those reports. And Chair, if it's okay, I would see that the principal system leader would be presenting that report, and potentially him or herself, we don't know who that is yet, and it may well be that you want to ask the Education Service questions on that also.
One of our questions, actually, who is the principal leader and when will they be in post? So that person isn't in post yet.
As of Monday, that's yesterday, as of yesterday, I know that 4 of the principal system leaders were appointed. We're seeing Dave Congreve, myself, are seeing Steve Davis on Friday, so I hope to know then who that person will be. That's the EAS appointment. Clearly, Sharon Cross will be the lead for school improvement within the Education Service from the 1st of September.
Ron Marchant?
Yeah, while we're on that subject, just a quickie. I'm a bit unclear myself about the relationship between the accounts manager and the principal systems leader.
And I would like to know that detail too, and I look forward to hearing it on Friday. I think the difference is, for me, it really is that stark distinction between these are the activities that the EAS brokers with schools, so different literacy activities, numeracy activities, and so on, different school improvement courses, if you like. That's doing them a huge disservice, but those types of support. So I want to know which of our schools are accessing literacy support, for example, what it looks like, who's getting leadership support, are going on courses, because I want to see which schools are getting it and which schools are choosing not to. because that's obviously concerning if they're not choosing to look at some of those inputs as well. So I think that person is more of an accounts manager, someone who just sees which schools have bought into which service. The principal system leader role, or principal challenge advisor, I'm not sure which one they're calling it yet, they've used both, is really about, well, so what? The question that Esther will always ask us, and we should be asking ourselves, so we've done that activity, everyone's gone along, done the course, what difference did it make for children? So for me, that's the distinction. I want to know the numbers in terms of who's been to what from the accounts manager, so that's, we don't have to trawl for it. The real discussion in terms of impact then happens with the principal system leader.
I mean, you'll certainly have my support if that's the line you take, because the way it looks at the moment, it almost looks like it's the same job. But within EAS, if they differentiate the way you're suggesting, and I hope they do, we need to make sure that there's some kind of Chinese wall to make sure you get a really dispassionate view of the outcomes, rather than one influenced by the accounts manager. The accounts manager I've always seen as somebody's trying to sell you stuff. That's how they normally operate, yeah.
Chair, just to come back to that, I think that's our requirement of the EAS and what we've been saying. So whatever they intend to do with other local authorities, our requirement of the Commission is that that's how we now want the information to be presented, and we'll persist in that requirement.
Okay. Can I ask, in 7.2, it says there, we will have a single point of contact within the EAS, who is the focus on Torvine. Would that be the point of contact for members? Do members contact, have a point of contact?
Chair, what I'd suggest is that Sharon Cross will be the point of contact for members, because she'll be the person who will broker that relationship with the EAS, and if you need information, then it may well be that we already have that without having to go to the EAS. If there are specific concerns about a particular school, I'd still say come to the Education Service first. If we can't get that information, or we need to find something more, then we'll be very clear with you about what we'll do to get you that information or to deal with that query.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Davis?
Yes, we're a little bit concerned about how, well, in this case, Sharon Cross would work with us. Would it be members individually? Would it be this committee? Would it be the full council? Or would it be the subcommittee? A little bit of confusion about who she's actually answerable to and who she would report to.
In terms of officer level, she reports to me. So clearly, I'm the responsible officer with the statutory powers for the moment. So she would report to me. In terms of then which fora she would come to, I would imagine that Sharon and I initially would probably come to these meetings together, may come to council together once she's inducted into her role, and that we decide that with committee, with council as we proceed, and it may be that it's Sharon or it's me who's coming. But I think that's for negotiation, and clearly we'll be very responsive.
Okay. Any other questions, members? Ron Marchant?
I've got a couple going back to 4.4 and 4.5, Dermot. They're related. Your paragraphs 4.4, 4.5. You talk in para 4.4 of some aspects of the plan being refined, and then in 4.5 you talk about the arrangements having potentially significant additional requirements on the LA. I mean, I was just wondering if you could clarify that. In what areas in particular are you thinking the refinements will take place and how that will impact resources?
Yeah, in terms of in terms of 4.4, obviously we haven't agreed the annex yet, so that's one of the issues. And obviously I've already spoken about how we're going to do that. The Minister wants a bit more detail from the EAS and on a variety of aspects within the business case, and that's a business plan, and those are being looked at. One of the big ones, of course, is going to be how the EAS works with the local authority around ALN, where the statutory responsibility for additional learning needs continues to sit very clearly with the local authority, and that's a huge overlap with school improvement in terms of that, and there is some detail to be worked out there, or at least it's not included in the original business plan. In terms of the national model and some of the implications of categorisation, if we have a number of schools go into 4, into the lowest category within the national model, we are required to consider the use of statutory powers. So there is an expectation that local authorities will be much more ready to take that step than has currently been the case in practice. And at the moment, there are a number of schools that if performance doesn't improve over this year, we anticipate that we may need to take that action in September. If that were to happen, then the consideration of the use of statutory powers could take several forms. Now, one form that we're looking at the moment is that if we do look at the English model, many local authorities would immediately suspend delegated powers for finance to a school, for instance, so that the school didn't have to, the logic is the school doesn't have to look at staffing issues, budgetary issues. It focuses on school improvement recovery journey. So in effect takes away some of the role from the head teacher and the governing body to allow them more time and space then to focus on school improvement. If we do that, then clearly who does that work? And that work would fall back on the local authority. So there's an implication there that we're modelling for at the moment, and we're confident that we'll be able to manage. Equally, there may be issues because that same action may also generate some work for our human resources. Because recruitment and any capability issues would then also, more of that work would fall back on the local authority. So again, we're in discussion with Graham Russell and his team about what support we would need to have in place to enable the school to recover quickly, for instance.
Did you wish to come back in there, Ron? Please.
Yeah, thanks, Dermot. I mean, one of the things on my mind about the refinements that may be taking place are probably specific to Torvine and the EAS, or all of the local authorities and the EAS. And that is, we're going to have this intelligent customer function. We're going to have somebody within the staffing of the EAS who is responsible for, well, 2 in fact, council manager and principal systems leader. There is still, to my mind, the overall governance issue, because as well as being a customer of the EAS, we are a part owner of the EAS. And the whole question of independence and objectivity will be under consideration. I mean, is that moving any further forward? Because I know it hadn't been resolved last time I asked Steve.
There was a meeting of the G7, I think this last week, just gone, and the national model requires to have, paraphrase, to have a management board, if you like, which would be the board that would run a company, but the equivalent thereof, and then an executive group which would be made up of a number of experts, together with the managing director and some other representatives from one of the lead directors for education, for example, to then look at the day-to-day business. It doesn't allow for a joint scrutiny within the national model, and it doesn't allow for what is currently called the JEG, the Joint Executive Group, either. And because, perversely, the national model was based on what was happening in South Wales, they sort of missed the detail of there were complications which we discussed before, because there were a company and company law applies. So I believe now that has been discussed at G7, and the proposal that will continue to be looked at and hopefully agreed soon is that the leaders of the council will sit as board members or their representatives. And I think there's just some agreement that needs to be reached about, is it going to be all leaders of the council, or their reps, so they don't want one or the other, they want consistency, with the managing director reporting to that group, and obviously the representative from the chief execs on that group as well. And then we've gone back out to advert, because we were required to advertise for expert members of the executive group, the operational group, and we had no applicants in the first round. These are unpaid posts, although expenses, I think, are allowed. So that advert's gone back out. So that's where we are at the moment. There is also a proposal that there is a non-executive function, I'm trying to get the terminology right, group of elected members that would not have a scrutiny function, but would have an advisory capacity to the board. And that's the proposal as it stands. I think that's being discussed. And there will have to be a response to the Minister over the summer, because this has to go live in September. So that's my understanding of where we are, but I haven't seen the formal minutes of the G7 to give you a more detailed update.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Davies?
I think that using the term "making things possible" it's a bit wishy-washy. Is that we want to make things happen rather than just make them possible on the things that you're talking about. That it's not just making things possible; it's making things happen. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, changes. That's obviously the second paragraph in 9. So the last paragraph in 9.1, changes in the reporting arrangements and within staffing structures within both the ES and the local authority make this possible. I mean, what we're saying is that it wasn't possible before. So structurally, we were in a position that even though we wanted to have that clarity, we simply couldn't. It is now possible to do that. And clearly what we've tried to summarise in the report and in the appendices is what that reporting will look like, and it will happen, and we've included the timescale for that. Those timescales in Appendix 3, I think it is, Councillor, need to be defined further, and that's the piece of work that we're doing on Friday, because obviously this was written at a point when we still haven't had the discussion with the EAS to nail down those points. So I take your point's absolutely right. What we're trying to communicate here is that there's been a lot of work up to this point, but structurally it was wrong. It just wouldn't allow us to exercise our statutory function in the way that we needed to, and we've now corrected that. So it's now possible, and your point is absolutely apt. It's now to get on with it, and what we're trying to indicate in the reporting cycle is that we'll be coming back to this committee on a termly basis to give you the impact of those changes and what difference that's making.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Phil Seaborn.
Dermot, how do you intend to share the regular progress reports with parents and the wider community?
I think one of the key tasks that we were hoping to talk, or key issues we were hoping to talk with the Recovery Board with next week was looking at how we collectively move aspirations within Torvine and look to how we can engage with parents in sharing a new view of greater aspiration and expectation for outcomes for children. And as you may know, the Recovery Board unfortunately isn't going to happen. My belief is that we should be sharing all information about school performance with everyone. All of it. Now, actually, most information about school performance is already available. And it's available on My School, on the My School website, which is a Welsh Government website. So we've already been looking at that particular resource because it's very good. I'm not sure how well our schools or our parents, our communities are using it, so I've got officers at the moment looking at writing an introductory guide about how you can use that if you're a parent in Torvine. That will go on our webpage so that we'll have a frequently asked questions about if you want to know this about your school, this is how you go and you find the information, and it gives all it's got all the information there. We'd have to simply replicate it if we want to use it again. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. We are going to be talking to schools about how we also share information. What other information do we need to share? So exclusions in attendance, for example, as well as performance information. And for me, the more information parents have about all schools' performance, the better, because that's the only way that we'll all support the whole community to have higher expectations. And we as council also will be bringing a paper to council in the new term looking at where we think we should be over the next 3 years as a council in terms of attainment. The provocation that we've put to the Recovery Board is my view is that we should be looking for all schools to be aiming to be in the first quartile for the free school meal benchmark group in 3 years' time. Now, that's quite a high aspiration for some schools, a lot less so for others. But it's a starting point in terms of what are we aiming for? And I think that's a debate that we need to have with schools. That's just starting now. But council also needs to be saying that's what we're aiming for, that's our expectation. We know that many of our schools have gone from a position of being in the bottom quartile to the top quartile over the last 3 years. So we know there are schools in Torvine who have been extremely successful, even in some very challenging circumstances. So we need to be raising our expectation for all of our schools, therefore, because we know there are examples of schools who've really done that. So I hope that gives you
Come back in there, Chair. I think it's really important, that we sell our story, the good achievement of the pupils, especially in the secondary schools after the exam results come out, for future business and industry. They can check on the progress of pupils, and there may be some future for these pupils in their businesses.
Chair, just very quickly on that, I mean, we're working with the communications team to make sure that all school lesson results, outcomes, are now reported in a way that maybe they weren't consistently before. There'll be regular updates from education in terms of school performance and outcomes and inspections and so on. And I take your point entirely. We need to look at not only Key Stage 4 and 5, GCSEs and A-level AS results, but its performance across the piece. So parents of children of all ages and parents of children who haven't started school yet should also know what their local school's performance is, so they can make informed choices about what they want for their child, and to come back and ask the Education Service and us collectively about what we're doing to make things better.
Any other questions? Ron Marchand.
Yeah, while we're still on information, I mean, I'm just assuming, Dermot, when you talked about the quartile, you're talking about a national quartile, because it's obviously not the narrower you make it, it becomes impossible for all schools to be in the first quartile, yeah. But the more important point, you mentioned the My School stuff, which is really good, and other stuff to be added. There is a real concern about the consistency and coherence between the various assessment methods. We've got the national model. We still have banding, though there's talk of dropping that. But I will point out that last week's or 2 weeks ago, Governors Wales, the panel of the great and the good, refused to confirm that the banding would be dropped in favour of the new national model. So potentially we could end up with model plus banding. And we have ESTIN. And then we'll have whatever you might want to add to the My School stuff. There is a real issue about confusion amongst most people who find handling data difficulty anyway. And from where I'm coming from, and not the school, but the role of the governor, a real confusion as to governors as to what the heck are we here for, to meet that one, and that one, or all of them, and how do I do it? So there is a real need to get some coherence here. And before I shut up, I'll just say that on Thursday at the Governors Wales thing, annual general meeting, there are 2 motions from the whole of Wales, both from Torvine, and one of them is on a request for the Welsh Assembly Government to try and bring these criteria together to, as far as is possible, to get a single perspective on public assessment of performance, so that public and schools know exactly where they're heading, what they need to do to get there. And hopefully, when we're doing your bit, adding to My School, we don't create another limb to this information flow.
Chair, I can only agree that at the moment it's confusing for lots of people about the different ways of measuring apparently the same thing, but not really. In terms of the banding, we are in the same position as a local authority. That is going to continue. We still have challenge and review meetings with Welsh Government where they look at the performance of schools across the region and in each of the local authorities. Those previously have focused on banding. They're less so now. We just had our first meeting under the new sort of system, and that's been a more general discussion. I have no information that tells me that banding will stop, so it is likely come September there will be 2 ways of categorising performance which are slightly different. In terms of adding to confusion, I think there's a danger here that we assume that people are currently confused and have information that's causing them this confusion. My concern is that parents and parents in the whole community don't have any information or very little information. So I think that's something we need to test out, and I should have really mentioned one of the things we need to go back to is to look at, to pull together a reference group of parents from across the schools, just to ask them those very questions when we come to a solution. But yeah, it is difficult, but clearly we've been criticised in the past for maybe not sharing, and I think we just need to be really clear about everyone has the right to know how well schools are performing. So.
Councillor Jeffries.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned a parents sort of group. Do you think the parents in Torfaen currently understand the reports that the children come home with at the end of an academic year?
I haven't asked them all, but I know there is some confusion, and it depends. I think sometimes there is confusion. I think there's a wide spectrum of understanding amongst parents of data, but also of how to interpret maybe some of the language that we as education folks use sometimes, and make assumptions that we've all been to school, so we should maybe understand that, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think there's a wider debate about how do we make sure, and it's really the point I think we're talking about, how do we make sure that the whole community understands what good looks like. And for us, that's been a theme through this year, I think, is how do we make sure, if we're aiming to come out of special measures, what does adequate and then good and then excellent look like, so we know what we're aiming for. And I think that's a wider debate we need to have around information use and performance, sort of performance management across schools with parents and the community. We need a lot more work on that. So I think there is confusion sometimes, hence why we've gone back to that single source of information from Welsh Government, and we're trying to come up with a product that enables any parent to be able to go and find out what we think will be the key questions the parents often have, and access that information easily. And clearly we'll test that out with a parent reference group. There's a duty clearly on each school then to also be mindful of ensuring that all parents, regardless of their own literacy levels or regardless of their own knowledge of education systems, can access information on their own children too. And I think we probably have some work to do with that, or at least to go back and check in with schools. Are they confident that that's the case?
Can I just draw you back to your report on item 6.4 on page 36 there, about targets. There's a lot of targets there in the one report, but there aren't any targets there for Torfaen. I wonder whether you'll be coming back to us with those targets.
In a word, yes. The target setting process is being developed now by the EAS, and schools will be expected to complete their targets. I think, Chair, it's by October. I'm not sure the date off the top of my head, but yeah, we'll be intended to come back with a progress report probably early in the new year, and that will be the first report where we can show you the targets for schools and progress towards those targets by individual schools.
Will they be coming back to us in the new year? To the Scrutiny Committee?
Yes, absolutely.
I think, well, can we have those in the right information and easily to understand for members in the format?
Yes. Chair, clearly those two we shall endeavour.
Thank you. Got Councillor Nigel Davis and then Councillor Pam Cameron, please.
Dermot, in the Appendix 5 about the draft commissioning requirements, there's a number of items that are, well, about me concerned. I think first one, I suppose, is on page 97. We will commission the AAS2, and the first item, develop and implement a system to broker school-to-school support. The question is why? Why should the AAS be doing this?
There are a number of reasons. In terms of the Hill report, which is clearly a key influence in the commissioning document, and also in terms of Welsh Government policy, the Williams report obviously is influencing where we're going in education in terms of Cross Wales over the next period. Schools will become the key lead in school improvement. The days of huge school improvement services being centrally located with local authorities we've already moved away from. The intention with ERU, the EAS and the other consortia is that over time they will diminish, and the model within school improvement services is that increasingly best practice in schools is harnessed, so schools become better at supporting each other. Research would also suggest that where schools are good or excellent, it's because they're already making links with other schools. They're getting the best from those schools, adding something in as part of that school-to-school work. So that's seen very much, those school-to-school connections are seen very much as the way forward in terms of how we promote better outcomes for children going forward. So there is a requirement on us to make sure that school-to-school work is increasing. So the EAS have a role in that. Obviously, 4 of our schools are part of Schools Challenge Cymru, and Professor Mel Ainscough, who's on the Recovery Board, is steering that for Welsh Government. So that's another sort of band of work. And we have also independently, of both of those elements, been working with our own head teachers to look at triads of school within Torvine, to see how we can promote learning that some of our schools who've just got good, got excellent, etc. in their inspections, can then spread that best practice.
But I still feel, why REAS? I mean, if the thing is that we got the schools already, the head teachers already talking to each other, and we've got the education authority, the education department doing the business. So why do we need AAS as well being involved in this?
Because we're a smaller local authority, and clearly the EAS has got a much wider reach. So in terms of looking at specific needs, looking at particular sector leading practice, not all of that exists in all areas within Torvine. In fact, not all of it exists necessarily across the whole consortia. So the EAS obviously gives us a big geographical reach to go out and make those connections with that best practice. I don't think we could be self-sufficient given our own physical size. That bigger pool, if you like, then of resources is a real boon to us, and it was one of the key reasons why the EAS was set up in the first place.
So the EAS basically is the conduit between the schools here and the schools in the other authorities, which are in the EAS, which are doing well, and which are saying, oh, they're doing well, let's find out why. So basically they are the conduit between the schools in the other authorities and between the schools in different authorities and spreading best practice in that way.
Sorry.
In short, yes, but clearly some of our schools, as you'd expect, some of our really good schools are already making those connections themselves. Some of our schools who are on the point of being very good sometimes need a bit more scaffolding and support, and that's where the EAS, where Schools Challenge Cymru is coming in, and where the local authority continues to have a role.
Okay. That's what
Councillor Cameron, I think, and then Councillor Karen. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you. You've sort of skirted around telling us that you're coming back to report, hopefully in a way that we can understand. But we noticed that Estyn and the Wales Audit Office are reviewing arrangements towards the end of the year. Are you doing a sort of self-evaluation that you could come to us as well and tell us what you have found the EAS has done to improve the situation?
As part of the preparation for the next Estyn monitoring visit to us, which again, Chair, the timing's just not been ideal because the Estyn colleagues are coming to see us, I think, again on Friday. It's a busy day on Friday. We'll know when the next monitoring visit's going to be. So clearly we would be anyway, but we will be updating our self-evaluation over the summer. Once we know, so we'll be updating it anyway, but clearly then we'll have the results on the 21st of August as well to add to that. Part of that evaluation will be looking at what services we've had from the EAS, how good that provision has been, how well we know ourselves, where the pitfalls have been and what we've done about it. So that will be the critique, if you like. What I would say is I think we've made significant steps, because what you see in the annex or in the Commission paper is a result of that thinking already, of what we need to change, recognising that some of it wasn't fit for purpose.
Councillor Karen.
Sorry, I wanted to piggyback a question from Councillor Davis there about the school support, and because basically I'm having huge amounts of problems getting a straight answer around school improvement. I mean, I'm getting the reply that it will be with the EAS. I'm now seeing that we're bringing in a school improvement officer for the LEA, and I'm also seeing within the Hill report and within the national guidelines around the new development of the EAS that school improvement seems to me to be something that's actually now being pushed down to schools. So I'm having difficulty. I mean, I understand that the EAS will continue to be school improvement. It's all the way through the guideline document. But basically, it seems to me that their remit is pushed more towards challenge, and not actually, and their remit around school improvement is allowing the LEA and the school itself, and just existing as almost as a broker really around that. But my real concern about it is what you're saying in these two paragraphs that Councillor Davis was referring to, and that's build capacity, resilience and sustainability in schools, and ensuring that there's no detrimental impact on those schools providing the support to others. And it seems to me that that is the importance of the EAS around school improvement, and that school improvement itself really is moving back towards the local authority. Would that be correct?
Let me see if I can give you a very simple, clear answer, which I think I'm about to fail in, but I'll give it a go. Obviously, right, we'll give it a go, Councillor Cam. The statutory function for education, so where does the buck stop? Well, it stops here. So we've got absolute responsibility. So whatever the EAS provides and whatever happens in schools is the responsibility of Cabinet, of Council, of officers, yeah? So we have to be sure that the services that schools are offering and that anyone that we commission, like the EAS, are fit for purpose. So your question is really about, well, who's going to do that school improvement bit? Is it going to come back to the local authority? The answer is no. We will not have a school improvement service within the education service for any foreseeable future that I can envisage. Will the EAS continue? Yes. Will it change? Yes. So it started with a sizable team. Each year, so it's been a couple of years, it's shrunk and it's changed in form. The model that Steve Davis has been very clear about is that over time that delivery, the EAS itself will change again, and it's likely, to have fewer and fewer core staff. So at the moment, it's using different types of contracts. So it's bringing people in on temporary contracts, on fixed period contracts. It's encouraging associates coming in from schools, so head teachers coming in doing some of that work, while ensuring that their schools are still well maintained and looked after. So I think that's the model that we're moving to. So you'll have a smaller and smaller school improvement service within the EAS, where more and more of the work of that school improvement based intervention and support will increase. Now, if you look across the border to England, there are very few large school improvement services, with very few large local authorities left, and very few large school improvement services. So if you like, those the school improvement focus is now sitting with head teachers and consortia of schools coming together. And that's already starting to happen in schools in Torvine as well. Several of our schools are taking on lead roles in particular aspects of work. So Coidiva are running work at the moment. Obviously they're in partnership with Blenheim at the moment, where actually the head teachers shared between both schools. We'll have another example of that in all likelihood in the next 2 weeks, which is still in negotiation, where head teachers are actually supporting other schools to develop. So I think this is a natural extension of where we have been. Clearly the task for the local authority is to make sure, A, that it's getting value for money out of the very expensive service that we're commissioning. So the way that, and the paper is very clear on it, the way that we will gauge that, going back to the point about self-evaluation, is we shall see an improvement in performance of pupils. We will see more schools coming through Eston with good and excellent. We will see ourselves moving up the rankings in Wales. So I think that's a natural extension of where we are. School improvement is not coming back to the local authority in the old sense, but it's always with us because we still have that responsibility. So we need to make sure that whoever's doing the direct delivery, we have got confidence that that's getting the right outcomes and is cost effective. But clearly focuses on making sure we get the right outcomes for children. I hope that gives you some clarity.
Okay. Are there any other questions? No?
Because I had a series of questions that were really aimed at the EAS, because I had assumed that they'd be here, given that the appendix to your report is actually their business plan and is actually quite crucial in understanding the commissioning process. So I can't, it's not really fair to ask you to do them, but there are some issues. Well, okay, we'll have a go then, Dermot. Off we go. Paragraph 112 of the EAS business plan talks about the EAS and the members of the consortium having a shared understanding of governance and therefore really supporting the way forward. Well, given the discussion we've already had on the lack of clarity around governance at the moment, I was going to suggest to Steve that shared understanding might be less strong than he thought, that's all.
Chair, to come back on that, to be fair, that's an issue for the 5 local authorities to resolve, because the EAS is dependent on us to agree that model. So that's clearly within a political process at the moment and is with the chief officers and leaders of the council to resolve, and it has to be resolved in short order. Time is running out on that because I think the Minister's patience will start to wane.
My last two are very similar. They were progress. The EAS gives us a quality cycle towards the end of the business plan. I was just wondering to what extent that is on track, because some dates are in the past, but there's still a TBC on one of them, even though it's in the past. And also the progress on the new structure, because they can't deliver the services in the way that you're seeking to commission them unless the new structure is in place. So those are equally valid questions, really, for scrutiny to ask of the EAS, to my mind.
I can answer the one on structure. As I said, I think almost all of the post bar 1 have now been appointed to. I think that post is now out to advert, and Steve reported to directors yesterday that he's confident that it should be in place for September, and we'll be in the position to have a discussion with him over the next couple of days about which staff we will have. So I'm expecting to know that by the end of the week. And in terms of on the first question, the first element was, yeah, I mean, some of that, as I think I've already referred to, isn't resolved. I'm not clear. I want to have a calendar, and I want to know which day is going to happen, in terms of when we'll get reports and when the information will come in, etc. So again, that's part of the discussion we're now having, and I would anticipate would be part of the monthly meeting I'll be having with the principal system leader. And just to, I think it's a really good point that you raise also about having clarity going forward about committees' expectation of who they would like to come to speak to them as well. Because clearly, as in my previous answer I've said, clearly it's the local authority's responsibility, and you need to have confidence that officers are doing what they need to do. But equally, you may also want to directly question the EAS in terms of the Commission. So it would be helpful to have that clarity going forward, and I'm sure we can achieve that.
Okay, are there any other questions, members? Okay. Can I thank you? Councillor Seaborn. Can I thank you very much, Dermot, for coming along, and sorry once again for keeping you waiting. Okay, members. We've had some detailed questioning there. I'm just wondering, would we like to come to the scrutiny review and make some recommendations? Would you like to perhaps identify a small number of activities, procedures or processes that could help us with improvement?
I did pick up a few things during the discussion, and just from the top there was early discussion around the need for effective moderation to ensure that the target setting in the future was a lot more appropriate. There was also the promise from Dermot that we'd receive termly reports from the EAS, from the principal system leader, and Dermot also promised to clarify the relationship between the principal system leader and the accounts manager within the EAS, which still seems a bit vague. The school targets to be disseminated amongst the committee when they are set in October. the need to set up a parents group to help us to understand how to better disseminate information which is understandable to parents and other stakeholders. And then also the need for reporting in New Year against progress against targets. So that's kind of what I've picked up through the meeting.
Are there any other points there that members would like to raise or to add? Councillor Karen?
If I could, like to add something about this, ensuring that there's no detrimental impact on those schools providing support to others, and this building capacity, resilience and sustainability within schools. I mean, I think we need to, I think we need to monitor that by actually speaking to heads, because one of the things that I know is a great struggle is, you know, teachers are going from one school to another to help out. So then you find that the better schools' results are starting to go down. And I think we have to be very careful about this issue. I'm not quite sure, I can understand I'm not putting this particularly well, but I think those are two issues that are around school improvement that we really do need to keep an eye on, because it does seem to me that school improvement, I've listened to Dermot's answer, and I've read the Hill report, and I've read the national guidelines on the EAS, and it does seem to me that we're pushing school improvement towards schools, and unless there is this capacity and resilience within the schools, this system is going to fail. So somehow I think we need to monitor the effect of that on schools.
You're saying is we need some assurance that schools that are taking part in this brokerage is not detrimental to the schools.
And I think the only way to do that is to actually speak to heads to ensure that they are on board with it, with these issues.
I mean, could this be something that the subcommittee sort of looks into when it's doing its detailed investigations into individual schools?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly where it should be, really. When the schools are coming forward, I mean, it isn't just, because that was something I was trying to get out of Dave and Dave Congreve now, about this issue, because I do feel that, you know, this is probably one of the most important blocks in school improvement, if this is the way in which Welsh Government want us to do it.
Councillor Brooks?
Yes, I don't want to repeat what other people have said, but this is a major concern to me when we are using the expertise in School A to go along to School B and C to assist and help them. And one of the things that bothers me greatly about it is that the teachers from School A will start to lose identity with their own pupils. And then the cohesion and taking matters forward with those children will be lost. And so this is the bit that's confused me a lot. There's been some suggestions that should be taken on board by perhaps this subcommittee. I support that suggestion, because we really need to keep a very tight rein on what's going on here, or we will find that the excellent schools will be coming back and being not excellent. So there's something, it seems to me that if you have a school which has moved up and become excellent, then my thoughts would be, should it be the school that I'm involved with, I want to keep them excellent. Although quite happy to share ideas and all of the rest of this, but moving people around seems to me to be, I'm not too sure about that. I'm not going to say it seems to be defeating the object, because I don't know. But I'm very, very anxious about shifting some of the experts, for example, of a school I may be associated with elsewhere, and then finding that school may start not to continue their development.
Government want us to go. We've just got to keep an eye on it.
Can I, Kerry Prendergast?
Just agreeing with what you said, one of my colleagues in North Wales was telling me exactly that his headmaster had been identified as so good, went out to advise him. His school had gone down, and when he come back, they were in special measures. So, you know, that's something we really do need to avoid.
Okay, are there any other comments or points we wish to raise, or are we happy for Tom to formulate the suggestions and pass them around?
It's all right. Can I just say, I would have come back when I asked the question, saying we were shocked. I was saying it tongue-in-cheek, because I don't think we really were shocked. I think we all knew, but I didn't get a chance to come back and say that, so I just want to...
Councillor Davies, did you wish to add anything to the scrutiny?
Just a little bit of... there's still my feeling of uncertainty, because I came to the council after EAS was brought in, there's still a bit of a feeling about EAS, where does the buck stop with EAS? I mean, it's been put forward as this fount of all knowledge and wonder, and will come out and much whiter and all the rest of it. And there's still that feeling of, well, what if EAS ain't up to snuff? Who's liable there? Where does the buck stop with EAS?
Could I add to that, Nigel, right? As has just been informed to us now, right, they can't get deputy heads from secondary schools to come in because they don't pay them enough. So you do wonder sometimes about the calibre of the people who are not working for the EAS. Not that I'm saying any of them are poor, but what I'm saying is, if we could afford more money, we could possibly get even better people than we're getting at the moment.
Okay, are there any other comments, Councillor? Sorry, I keep calling you Councillor.
No,
Ron Marchant, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to see in the recommendations something that Dermot picked up at the end, and that is, I think, scrutinising the activities of the EAS is not just a matter for our School Improvement Office, but is an integral part of this body's work, and that therefore, as a matter of course, they should be here when we are discussing school improvement to talk about their role in that school improvement and how it's working. I mean, answering your question, I don't think the buck does stop with the EAS. I mean, the only buck really is if we don't like the EAS supply, we buy something else. And where's the option of that? Yeah.
Are we happy then for Tom to formulate all these suggestions and recommendations and send them around for members, and then we can pass them on if we need to be to the executive member?
Ask a question, sorry, it was on the next meeting, item 9. When is the next meeting? That's my ignorance.
I don't think we've got a date actually for another meeting at the moment, Tom.
Next meeting, sorry, the 24th of September. 24th of September, that's the visioning meeting, so that's the meeting to determine the work programme going forward.
Okay. Would you mind if I just make a suggestion here and now, so people think I think at that time, one of the things we ought to focus on, maybe the first meeting after the visioning meeting, is one, the actual results that come out this August the 21st, because that's crunch day. All this other stuff about given time and so on will all fall in the wind if we don't do as well as we think we've done. And that's in the lap of the kids who sat the exams. It's all history now. And the other one is the relationship of that to the target setting exercise, because I think we probably ought to scrutinise what we think is the realistic nature of the target setting in the light of those results and how they're acting on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got our first topic for our first meeting. Okay, can we move on?
I may live to regret that for another.
Can we move on then to item 10? Is the exclusion of the press and public. The report is not for publication.